So before we get going, what we're going to demonstrate and build is a draggable element, and then we're going to convert this project over to be a drag and drop that will support uploading files to a particular server. So what we're going to do is jump into our inner HTML and then build out a small template. Now for this, we're going to keep the markup as simple as possible. Now I'm going to call this the uploader, and inside here, we're going to then build out the functionality to upload files. However, before we get there, I'm going to demonstrate some base level knowledge that we'll need before we can get more complex and build file uploaders and these types of things. Now inside of our uploader, we're going to create a div, which we're then going to give a class, and we're going to call this just drag me. That's just going to be a self-closing div with no contents inside. Now underneath, we're going to create a drop zone. So we're going to then demonstrate how we can take this particular div. We'll momentarily apply some styles, and then we're going to drop it onto this drop zone. What I like to do is just add a nice little emoji inside of here, and we can just simply say drag here. Now if we save this out, we have a drop zone defined in our browser. Now before we go any further, it makes sense to add some styles. So if we create an inline style element, inside we can then write some basic CSS. So for our uploader, we're going to use a box sizing of border box. We'll then set a maximum width of 90%. I'll also create a nice border radius of 10 pixels. We can then create a border on the bottom. This will be a 3 pixels solid border with a hex code of D2D, 5D, and A. Now underneath that, we're going to then create some margin to nicely center this. So we'll give it a top and bottom value of 25 pixels, and then auto either side. Padding, of course, we'll just keep this nice and uniform and use 25 pixels, and then the background color we'll just make a nice simple white. So if we save this out, we then get something nice like this, which then leads us onto our drop zone. So before we start doing our draggable component, we'll then add these styles for our drop zones. So this will create a border radius of 5 pixels. We can then give it a straightforward margin top of 25 pixels. Padding will keep the same at 25 pixels as well. Now for this, I like to use a dashed border. So we'll use 2 pixels dashed with the same hex code as above, D2D, 5DA, and the background is just going to be slightly lighter. For this, the hex code is F1, F2, and F5. So when we save this out, we then get a nice drag and droppable looking zone with a drag here. So this is fairly nice, and this is probably something that rings some bells in your mind, where you've used something like this before. Now our drag me div, what we're going to do is just temporarily create this, so we'll delete it in the future. But for this, we'll create a nice background color. We can use CE1, F99 for a nice pink. We use a border radius of 5 pixels. We can give it a width of 50 pixels, a height similar of 50 pixels as well. So when we save this out, we'll then see a nice pink square. Now, if I click on this and drag it, it doesn't actually do anything. So the purpose of this video is to, one, set up this drag and drop functionality and demonstrate our drop zone and the draggable element. Now, any elements on our page can be draggable. And images by default, for example, I'm sure you've clicked on an image and dragged it in the browser. They are in fact draggable by default. So this allows us to attach draggable behavior to not just images. So if we wanted to have a to-do list or something, or perhaps we wanted to just drag boxes into other boxes as part of the user interface, we could attach a draggable attribute to a DOM node. This can be attached to any DOM node. Now the interesting thing with this, if we save this out, this isn't actually going to create it as draggable. Now you may be wondering why, because we have other attributes such as required. If this was on an input, for example, of course this isn't an input, but if this was, we don't have to say required equals true. However, with draggable, we do have to, in fact, explicitly say draggable equals true. We can then save this out and we can click on the div, and you can see that now I have the ability to drag it anywhere that we like. So what we'll do is leave it there for this video. This is a nice benchmark for us to get to. It's just learning about this draggable attribute that we can then attach to any particular DOM node. And it doesn't matter how many we have. We could, for example, create 3 of these boxes and they will all become draggable. So it's completely up to you what you want to use these APIs for. I'm sure you can already think of lots of use cases for creating some nice drag and drop functionality. And I'm then going to teach you all the features that you might want to use for this API. And of course, as I mentioned, it's one of my favorites, so I'm looking forward to taking you through this chapter. So now that we have our draggable attribute added, we can then drag particular elements. However, we don't have any listeners for our drop target. So this is what we're going to look at in the next couple of videos.